How Native education started. Education systems weren't designed for the benefit and success of Native students. Quite to the contrary, the first schools experienced by Native children were boarding schools designed for the expressed reason to, quote, kill the Indian and save the man, as Henry Pratt shared in his 1892 speech. Indigenous Navajo scholar Timothy Begaye shares that the entire concept of formal schooling in the Western tradition is a major weapon of colonization and assimilation. Carol Iron Rope Herrera, a Lakota elder, says, quote, the education system is geared to assimilate our people into their thinking patterns, and even our government, our tribal government, is based on that. I'm going to play a clip for you of Elder Samuel Martinez to help us consider education as a form of genocide and colonization.
I was born in 1950. If you Google relocation after 1950, the genocide Holocaust campaign was to take us off the native lands and move us into the cities so that the church and the school could carry out the cultural genocide. If you Google it, Relocation Act 1950, their campaign was to kill the Indian, save the China. My mom, a medicine woman, orphaned by the Americas Holocaust, Flatpass in all the places in our país said no dogs and no Indians and no Mexicans allowed, including hospitals. Her parents died early. She was raised by the grandmothers who survived. We are descendants. My mother is a descendant of the 5% of our people that survived the American Holocaust in what is now called United States. 100 million Native people killed in that genocide. So they continued the cultural genocide.
And cultural genocide does continue today. Now, I want us to think about where we are now. Considering how formal schooling for natives began, participating in educational systems can be problematic, but opting out and making it through these systems can also have challenges. Higher education in the American system is needed for socioeconomic mobility, but this isn't happening for Native students. Over 60% of the U.S. high school students go on to college, compared to only 19% of all Native American students. Problems with schooling begin early on, where Native students' needs aren't being met in the classroom. Native students come into a school culture that is different than their own. The language is different, the structure is different, the values are different from their home culture, making it hard for them to thrive and succeed. To combat this problem, Native communities are taking a variety of approaches. First being adopting instructional models that reflect Native home values. In a linguistic anthropology study looking at participant structures, anthropologist Suzanne Phillips explains a few different participant structures in the Western classroom. The first and most common is having all the students sit with the teacher at the front and the students there sitting, and the students can raise their hand and they get called on to answer questions. A second participant structure is where students are put into small groups to discuss and the teacher comes by to assess each group. Another structure is where students do all their work alone and can have the teacher come and help them one-on-one by raising their hand. So that's where the student is initiating communication. The fourth participant structure, and the one that is used least in elementary school settings, is a group project structure, where students manage and interact directly with each other. This was seen as one of the best structures for Native students. Susan Phillips writes that they were fully engaged when working in groups. The article explains that Native students became completely involved in what they were doing, concentrating completely on their work until it is completed, and talking a great deal to one another within the group. It's worth noting that the first two participant structures, the teacher was in charge and directed who spoke and when, by calling on raised hands, and it was also a demonstration of competency, a public performance. This public display is also not in alignment with typical Native participant structures and requires students to have a certain level of self-confidence that is frequently undermined by white education models from an early age. This performance of knowledge doesn't sit well with traditional ways. Lakota elder Carol Iron Rope Herrera explains that we think humbleness is an important part of who we are. We never go out there and brag about ourselves. The only ones who can talk about us in a good way are the ones that witness the good things we've done. So, in the classroom, speaking to provide answers in this way is incongruent. With participant structures easily accessible that seem to work so much better at assessing Native student knowledge and are used so infrequently in school settings, it's critical to figure out how to use those more often at an early age. Second is uplifting home practices and praising Native intelligence. Native knowledge is extremely useful and valuable in its epistemological ways, such as the idea of broad attention. The anthropologist Barbara Rogoff explains. Broad attention is when you're sitting in ceremony and you're watching everything around you and everyone praying. You're observing everything and taking in everything, so when you're asked to do something, you'll know how to do it. And that broad attention is key to learning anywhere. Broad attention helps children grow and develop as a person and as a scholar. That type of attention is looked down upon in early elementary settings up until high school or college even. Broad attention is valued in academia, but not in our early childhood classroom settings. I wonder why we limit our children that way in the Western setting, and why we don't think they're capable of broad attention, when clearly our Native students are doing it so well, and it's being labeled as distracted or bad behavior. And if we're involving our children in community and in their culture, and helping them learn their native language, studies show that students who know and speak their native language do better in school. So I urge parents and students to reframe their thinking and recognize the education system for the colonial system of oppression that it is. And we can choose not to participate in it when we can and not give it so much power. By continuing to learn our native ways and valuing what helps us learn, and structuring our education in a way that serves us, and not in a way that serves the systems of colonialism.